volunteer
That's
to
what I was
fight
going
in the
for.
Donbass. Yeah. All right. How's the camera looking?
I can see your crotch and Wyatt's confused face, but that's a metaphor.
Well, luckily Wyatt can see all of me, including the real me that lies.
Love you guys. So good to see you.
For those of you watching at home right now, we're just letting our Icarus Fest audience into the Williams Center. We're hoping to improve the lighting in here. This is like the political version of Weird Al's UHF. I took the Darien Gap to get up here.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. This is the first time I've been a human trafficking victim.
Oh wow. You got off light, like, I mean, there's definitely something in this being called the Icarus festival, as you know. I mean, Icarus was, of course, you know, flew too close to the sun. So maybe apropos, maybe not.
Yeah.
Oh. Max's lower half again.
And we can hear Glenn. Glenn, can you give us a 10 count?
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Amazing.
I can see the feed of Michael Olivo and yeah, Kit KLARENBERG.
Okay.
Hey, Glenn.
How are you?
Corey, can you give me a thumbs up if everything's good up there? All right. Are people complaining about the camera or they like it? Our audience is very outspoken.
Max?
I can introduce, or do you want to go ahead and... Okay.
Welcome to the third annual Icarus Festival. This year we decided to focus on, well, the first 2 years I'll tell you, we tried to bring in Max and Aaron were part of that actually. We tried to bring in many different, what we call dissident voices from the left and the right. This year we decided just to do one. We decided to focus on one voice, the Grayzone, and we're doing this for one reason and one reason only. We believe that the Grayzone is the best journalistic outfit in America, in the West, most likely. And we think that Max and Aaron and Wyatt and all the rest, and Kit, are doing the most important journalism in the world. And how do we know that? We know that, right? You can actually prove it. You can actually prove it, can't you? Because every one of these guys has been punished severely, censored, ostracized, attacked from every which direction in all sorts of ways. And that's how you know they are getting close to the truth. And that's how you know that they're doing important work. So this is why we decided to devote this entire day, this entire festival, to celebrating the work of Max, Wyatt, Aaron, Kit, and the rest of the Grayzone all together. And we're so glad that you came. We sold this out. This is the first time we have sold out the Icarus Festival. So that I think tells you that we made the right choice this year. So thank you for coming. Let me tell you just some logistics. This will be the first panel, as you know. The schedule is posted many places on the website. You should have gotten an email yesterday. I hope you did last night. Good. The subject heading was a little weird, but it was the right email. Anyway, yeah. Then after this panel, we're going to just have lunch, and that's open. And there's lots of great lunch spots right here on the street here in Rutherford. And then we're going to reconvene at 1 o'clock for a huge panel on Palestine, featuring SABBY SABS as the moderator. So come back for that, of course, and it'll be a full house for that, I'm sure. There will be, I think there's a break, a short break, yes, after that, and then we do our final panel, which is kind of on the empire in general, large panel with all the Grayzone greats up here. And then, if you're a VIP, and there's a lot of you, the dinner will be right there. It's right downstairs, outside. Really great indoor-outdoor space that we're setting up right now. And that's gonna be an amazing dinner, by the way. You guys are lucky. So, thank you all for coming, and let's get started. Max, I will have you, I guess, introduce these guys, and then we'll get it going.
Thanks a lot, Thaddeus. Thanks to the Williams Center. Thank you all for coming out. It's nice to see everyone in person. I don't know if we're the greatest website or greatest outlet. We're just doing the best that we can, and we're only able to fulfill our potential with your support. And I think what we are very good at is providing group therapy. That's pretty much what this is about. We're heading into some even darker times, I think, in the coming weeks and months, and we should have ended this conflict in Ukraine should have ended by now. We're seeing some moves toward that, but a greater preponderance of power in favor of continuing this war. I believe war could return to Iran at any moment, and of course we're witnessing a genocide in Gaza, and we've been covering these in and out at the Grayzone since 2022, and everything in between since our inception in late 2018, early 2019. We got to bring WYATT on board and KLARENBERG, and you know, they're really the heart of our print online investigative side, and we have gotten to know some of the best dissenting analysts or critical analysts in the world, like Glenn DIESEN. Glenn DIESEN is a political scientist now based in Norway, and I guess I'll let WYATT introduce himself and Kit introduce himself, but you know them for their you'll know them by their fruits. And Kit's investigations, I think, have been some of the most consequential on UK intelligence intrigues. So hopefully we'll be able to get into that today. And this is the first panel. For those of you watching the live stream, this will be the first panel. It's going to go for an hour and a half, and then we're going to break, and then we have a new stream set up starting at 1 p.m., and that'll be 2 panels, and then hopefully we'll be able to do some interviews afterwards. If you want to volunteer some super chats, we're going to hopefully try to get those out during Q&A along with your questions in person, and I think that will be the best part, and I'll look forward to seeing you all at the panel at 1. Aaron MATÉ should be there as well, and along with all of your other favorites. So with that, let's get it started. Thaddeus?
All right, so I think let's have WYATT introduce yourself, and then I feel like since we've got people from Europe here, we should probably go to them soon, since they're waiting patiently. WYATT, who are you, and why are you a danger to the American empire?
I'm just some guy.
No, you're not.
No, I'm WYATT Reed. I edit the Grayzone. I help kind of chisel down our investigations into the leanest things they can be. I've been blessed to be able to work as a correspondent and cover stories in about a dozen countries, and I am very grateful to be here today.
And you know, the topic, not that we're limited to it, but is for this panel is Ukraine, NATO, and I guess the future of the American empire, or the war for Eurasia, I think we rephrased it. And so Glenn and Kit are experts on that conflict, but WYATT is an expert in a different way, and this is another thing I didn't mention about the Grayzone, which is one of the main reasons I find them to be so important, is that they do actual on-the-ground reporting in places no other media goes. I mean, it's criminal that this is the case, but it is true. And WYATT spent, I think it was a month, right, in Donbass? Yeah. Do you want to just talk about that briefly, and then we'll go to Kit and Glenn?
Sure. the Donbass, although not being internationally recognized as part of Russia, is by far the most pro-Russian part of the planet I have ever been to. That was kind of the major takeaway, is that when you're there are Russian flags everywhere, there are Z's on all the cars, there are a lot of people who very much see the war, the invasion, as kind of a humanitarian intervention, and it's a perspective that even if you don't agree with it, it's important to acknowledge and it's important to deal with it, and that's something the mainstream media obviously has refused to do since the beginning of the conflict. It's difficult to get there. Oftentimes they are a little bit suspicious of Western journalists and want to question you a little bit when you get in, perhaps with good reason, but yeah, spending a month there was very eye-opening in terms of getting a sense for the population's perspective, and then just seeing what they're enduring, which is it's horrific. The amount of destruction that's been wrought, in many cases using U.S. manufactured bombs, it's unbelievable until you see it with your own eyes. So it is important that we stop funding that as soon as possible, in my perspective.
So I want to talk now about how the three of you have been punished. And let's talk, I guess, Wyatt first, if you don't mind. I mean, I guess it was a year ago? Was that the smear job on you? Do you want to discuss that briefly? I mean, it was, to me, a clear attempt to just take down the Grayzone once again.
Yeah, they published a hit piece in the Washington Post accusing me of being some kind of Iranian spy and or traitor.
No, on the payroll, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that and you made a lot of money off of that Press TV gig, didn't you?
Yeah, I briefly freelanced for them and made a couple grand several years before I worked for the Grayzone, but obviously that wasn't the point. The point was to smear the Grayzone as some kind of foreign influence operation, which couldn't be further from the truth. We obviously don't accept any money from government sources, and they knew that, but they didn't want to let that get in the way of a good hit piece. I mean, beyond that, I mean, I've been kicked off of PayPal and Venmo, and it's kind of a debanking situation.
Wow.
So there's that. Many things to look forward to if you become a dissenting voice in American journalism. I'm sure there's more to come.
Are you still debanked?
Yeah, from PayPal and Venmo. That's permanent. That's for life.
Glenn, I saw you on Max's live stream a few days ago discussing, and it was really harrowing because I've been following you for a long time and you've been on my show, and I too am a huge admirer of your work. To hear you say that you are now considering leaving Norway because of how you've been treated by, I guess, is it colleagues or the media? Can you talk a little more about that in specifics? I'm really curious and concerned about this.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And the worst thing is you don't actually have to do anything wrong. If you're a professor of political science, the point of departure you do in any analysis in terms of international security is the security competition. That is, state A competes, arms itself, it undermines security of state B. This is kind of the main idea, which is why we pursue indivisible security. Anyways, long story short, my whole argument is if you want security, you have to recognize the security concerns of your opponents. Otherwise, the only way to have security is to defeat your adversaries if you think they're just acting out of evil. And this is effectively the policy of the West now. We never discuss security concerns of Iran, China, Russia, no one. And if you try to bring it up, then you're legitimizing it and you're essentially taking their side and you're a traitor. So this is kind of the logic. I always warn against this because if we buy into this, that our opponents can't have any legitimate concerns, then the logical outcome is always war. And that explains a lot over the past 30 years. Anyway, so I tend to, my main focus has always been on Russia. So for this reason, they labeled me very quickly in the media as agent of Russia. I'm also participating in an influence operation, apparently, because I went to a conference in Kaliningrad about Immanuel Kant and his philosophy on the reason of the individual. And, I went to, been writing in Chinese media, been on Chinese TV, so I'm also a Chinese agent. 3 months ago, I was in Iran with Max Blumenthal. So after this, some also labeled me Iranian agent. And of course, 2 months ago, I was in Georgia. And because I was on national TV there in the studios, I hired a studio there to do my own podcast for one day. And that was evidence of how intertwined I was with the regime. So I'm also a Georgian agent. So you would think I would be pretty rich by now.
You're very busy. You have a lot of jobs.
Busy.
You have a lot of jobs.
A lot of jobs.
You can
Unfortunately,
retire.
no one's actually paying me, which is, but they have a good imagination. If someone paid for your plane ticket so you could attend a conference, then this is evidence that you bought and paid for. So now you're no longer an independent scholar and a professor. You're just an agent for a hostile foreign power. So this is essentially the way it goes, and there's some natural elements in this in society. Some journalists who feel they're fighting the good fight, and they're fighting against evil. And towards this end, even cancellation, censorship is okay. But the problem is also very organized. That is, we have humanitarian NGOs, they're called, but they're funded by our government, the U.S. government, Soros, the National Endowment for Democracy, which is very openly a CIA front. And they put pictures of my house on TV, on the internet. They send letters to my university to say that I'm problematic, I spread propaganda. They never explain what propaganda is in their mind or how I've spread it. They cancel events I'm speaking at. It's make life very horrible. And they put your name in the newspapers as well, calling you more or less a traitor, which makes it very difficult to live here because you still have to go to work with colleagues. Your kids still go to school, so it's not. Once this becomes acceptable to refer to someone this way, we don't really have libel laws, so it's not a great place always to stay once they have you in their crosshairs.
Now, are you thinking of leaving Europe entirely, or just Norway? Or are you not considering this? I thought you'd said this to Max, that you were thinking of leaving.
Yeah, no, this is correct.
Okay.
Well, the thing is, I went abroad for 20 years. I left in 2000, I came back in 2020, and I had, I don't recognize my own country anymore, to be honest. But from what I'm being told, things aren't all that wonderful in other parts of Europe either. So it is difficult to say where to go. I lived in Australia for about 14 years. I was teaching as a professor in Moscow for a couple of years. But I guess that will only confirm, if I would go to Moscow, would only confirm the suspicions of all the journalists who's been calling me a Russian agent. So I'm not sure, to be honest. But we're already putting our ducks in a row and preparing for it. So it's unfortunate, but this is how it's become.
Again, it's simply proof that you're doing important work. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to see that. I want to, when we come back in the next round of questions, I want to get to your book on Russophobia, which if you have not read this book, please do so. I think it's one of the most important books of the last several years, and we talked about it on my show, but it's kind of, I think in many ways, at the root of the problem here, so I want to get to that in a few minutes with you. Kit, hi, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
You're in Serbia, though, so that's not good.
No, well,
you work because you work for them, right?
From my perspective, it's great.
Okay.
And I was on the front page of a national newspaper the other day without my knowledge or consent. So clearly, I'm an important local player. I might add in introduction, I think in typical humble style, WYATT is greatly underrating the extent to which he chisels my work, because it is typically impenetrable. And he does a fantastic job of making it readable and presentable to the public. So thank you, WYATT, as ever.
Thanks, Gabe.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I am here both out of choice, but not out of choice. I am effectively exiled from my home country because of things that I have written and said, primarily for the Grayzone. Now, some members of the audience, some viewers might be aware, some might not be. You are forgiven if you aren't. In May 2023, I flew back to London, my city of birth, because I had received abrupt shock news of a close relative being extremely unwell. I was met on the tarmac by 5 armed counter-terror police. And then given the option of being arrested for simply non-compliance, or entering an interview in which I would have no right to silence. I would have to give over the passcodes to my encrypted devices and answer any question that was put to me. And the 2 counter-terror police, whose names I never got to learn, who grilled me, their entire interest was the Grayzone. And for 6 hours, I was compelled to talk in extensive detail about my relationship with Max Blumenthal, about the Grayzone's non-existent agreement with the FSB to publish hacked documents, and all sorts of other crazy things. Now, my detention, it spurred international outcry, and I was quite surprised. You know, I was invited onto the Hill of all places to discuss my experiences. I thought this might act as a deterrent to British authorities to doing the same thing again, but no, they seem to have been emboldened by the fact they've gotten away with it. And since my detention, we've had, you know, David Miller, an academic and journalist who's very anti-Zionist, has been repeatedly stopped entering the UK, his country of birth. The former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray, likewise. Of course, Richie Medhurst, who was arrested coming off a plane in Heathrow last year, still faces terrorism charges for refusing to give up his sources. So,
Asa Winstanley? Asa Winstanley too?
Oh, and of course, yep. Asa Winstanley. Yeah,
was raided.
Yeah, that's a shameful shortfall on my part. Yeah, like Asa Winstanley got raided, and it was subsequently found that the raid was completely illegal. But British authorities, they are off leash at the moment. Like the negative media coverage that their repressive actions elicit, which is sufficient to prompt relative normies to ask what the hell is going on here, when you have people being arrested for supporting Palestine action because they're wearing T-shirts that don't mention the group. You know, like quite clearly, yeah, something very dark and unprecedented is afoot. And yet I do draw some comfort from the fact I saw there was a prominent supporter of mine online who said recently, why would you bother spending millions of dollars attending Columbia Journalism School when you can have your reporting vetted by MI5 at an airport? So I'm kind of like, I see that as an endorsement of our reporting. And, you know, you've got to bear in mind that we at the Grayzone, since the very start of the proxy war, we have been publishing leaks, publishing fairly incendiary stories about how Britain is leading the proxy war and in Ukraine. And we caught an enormous amount of flack for this. And it's gotten to the point now that the mainstream media, including the Times of London and the New York Times, admit that Britain is viewed by the Ukrainians as the quote unquote brains of their conflict with Russia. I mean, on the one hand, God help us all if the British are in charge of this. But on the other hand, I think that we've been vindicated and validated in everything that we have reported. And we do so at the risk of sounding like I'm humble bragging. We clearly do so at enormous risk to ourselves. There is that famous quote, which is, in a time of universal lies, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. And I think that, for better or worse, we are routinely committing revolutionary acts in our work.
Again, is there any further proof that what they're doing is important work? I mean, it's amazing what has come down on you guys, and I didn't even know some of these stories. Wyatt, what do you, and I sort of want to hear from Kit too about this, the normies, I mean, you raised the crucial question, Kit. When are the normies going to start caring about this and paying attention? You want to start, why don't you talk about the Brits first, and then I'll ask Wyatt about the Americans in Virginia and how they feel about the empire. But Kit, I mean, do you see movement among non-political people in Britain around this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No, I mean, I do, and I think that I have spoken to, of course, you know, I do feel a sense of detachment from the UK in general, because I mean, I literally can't go back there. Like, I mean, it's not worth the risk, like from any perspective. But at the same time, there are people I know there who are not politically connected, who get most of their information from the mainstream media, who see 80-year-old priests getting arrested for holding signs saying, "I support Palestine action." And they are asking, what the hell is going on? What is triggering this absolutely vicious, belligerent state backlash against the fluffiest, most kind of tame form of political activism imaginable? And that's important. And I said recently on Twitter, and I shall reiterate it now, you know, keep pushing, keep going, because I mean, Palestine Action's banning, for example, this was conducted despite the fact that per Declassified UK, the British government could find no legal grounds with which to ban them legitimately. They relied on the reports of a Zionist lobby group called We Believe in Israel to justify the ban, you know, in terms of unsubtle names. And yeah, that like this is a sign of a regime, of a system of repression that is on the ropes and is wounded and scared. You know, like if they were at the peak of their power and prominence, they would not be bothered about the activities of Palestine Action or people who support them. They are clearly very frightened, and this is happening throughout Europe. And it's actually very heartening to see more and more people are questioning not only their government support of Israel or their country being part of the EU or NATO, but they are questioning the quote-unquote democratic structures in which they live, because you can't vote yourself out of a genocide. You can't do anything through standard accepted political structures to create, to facilitate fundamental change in the clearly failing systems in which you live. So people are looking for alternative mechanisms and means of expressing their dissent, and that is very heartening. I have made the point before, and I shall do so again because it does bear repeating. Repressive power structures are always at their most repressive when they are on the verge of collapse. It is a shame that we have to live through the highly repressive part, but the promise of something better at the end of all of this is clearly there, I would say.
That's the first good news I've heard in a long time. From the Grayzone. The Grayzone never gives good news until now. This is finally. Wyatt, can you give us some more good news? What's happening in Virginia? But I mean, of course, like, what do you think is happening in America abroad, broadly? I mean, among the so-called normies. I mean, do you see? I'm trying to think myself. Do you see any movement among non-political Americans who know just about nothing about the world around these issues? I don't know.
I think you see movement on Gaza, on just the live stream genocide. I think for anyone with a conscience, it's kind of impossible to see these videos and not be moved. In terms of, you know, is there a burgeoning anti-imperialist consciousness that's going to seep out of the woods of Virginia? Probably not today or tomorrow, but
maybe one wood in Virginia, like where you live.
Lynchburg.
Yeah, Lynchburg's the center. The anti-imperialist resistance is there.
Yeah, yeah, it's a long journey. I kind of, from my perspective, I think I see a little bit more movement in the UK, where the outright banning of a group like Palestine Action leads to this very grassroots rejection, that you can see grandmas signing up, you know, to just basically be arrested and manhandled by these counterterrorism police because that, you know, they believe it's worth standing up and fighting for. I'm not sure we've reached that kind of moment in the U.S. yet, but what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty pessimistic. Again, it's astonishing how ignorant Americans are about politics, and especially world politics. I mean, they don't know where these countries are. Have you seen maps? These studies of Americans are asked to point on a map where certain countries are, and they put Ukraine and Alaska, and they put Iran and Hawaii, and I mean, so yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. We could get into a long discussion about elite theory, but I think the elites will have to be forced to change one way or the other. Well, okay. What's going to happen is not, and I think Kit will appreciate this, and I think all of you will appreciate this. I don't believe the American people are going to rise up, or even if they're going to rise up and convince our leaders to change their course in American foreign policy. I just think the only thing that's going to change the American empire from doing what it's doing is what the Viet Cong did, which is to defeat them on the battlefield. I don't see any other way, and that's why the so-called axis of resistance in the Middle East, I think, is so crucial. That's why I think the war in Ukraine is so crucial. I think that because Russia is, from my point of view, offering one thing, is resistance to the empire. And what we do see is a mounting axis of resistance globally, right? And BRICS might be just the fullest manifestation of that, but it's all around. I've never in my lifetime, and I've been anti-war my entire life, I've never seen this much organized state resistance to the Anglo-American empire. And that, to me, is cause for both concern for the coming wars that will bring, because the empire won't go down without a fight, but it also gives me some hope that I think I do see light at the end of the tunnel. I do think in my lifetime, I think there will be far fewer military bases across the world. I do think the American military budget will be smaller. I think, in my lifetime, and I think we will have some sort of retrenchment, but this is all, of course, being optimistic. Yeah. So Glenn, and this is a good segue, because your book, Russophobia, is also depressing in this, and because it shows that, what has it been, 300 years or 400 years of an obsessive preoccupation or hatred of all things Russian by European elites, right? It's an amazing book, and it chronicles this irrational fear of Russia for hundreds of years, and it just hasn't changed much, and that's what's depressing about it. We now talk about Vladimir Putin the way that we talked about Joe Stalin, and the way we talked about the czars before then, and it hasn't changed. In fact, in some ways, Putin is even depicted more harshly, isn't he, than Joe Stalin and a lot of the Soviets. It's amazing, right? He's Hitler. He's even worse. So, Glenn, does that book, and I hear how you are much more depressed about the situation for very good reasons in Europe. Does your book and your knowledge of that history, does that make you even more depressed? I mean, do you see that as sort of this, to me, it's just a bizarre psychology among European elites around Russia. Do you see any chance of that changing, and how, and what? Well, no, let me ask you this. Why do they think this? Why have they been so attached to this hatred of Russia for 200, 300 years for almost never any serious or good reason? Do you have a thought about that? I mean, you sort of address it in the book, but can you talk about it now, about why you think this enduring hatred of Russia is still with us?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit pessimistic because it kind of undermines the whole assumption that states act as rational actors. So, for example, if you see what's happening in Europe now, we launched this war which was not in our interest. We've divorced ourselves from important countries like Russia, increasingly China, and then nothing we're doing is in our interest anymore. And you see this, the reduction in security, our economies, the standing of Europe in the world. I mean, it's quite sad what's happening to the continent, but still they're doubling down. They see that Russia is winning the war, and they still keep chanting, Ukraine's winning, and let's just keep it going a little bit more. And it doesn't really make any sense. If you're losing a war, you want to make a better deal today than tomorrow. But so I think the propaganda aspect is quite important because, well, I argue that, of course, phobia, or Russophobia, is irrational fear of Russia. Now, there's rational reasons to fear Russia, like it is the largest nuclear power in the world. But however, I address the irrational hatred or fear of Russia, and a lot of this is linked up to propaganda. And as you know, Sigmund Freud, Edward Bernays, all of these people who laid a lot of the foundational literature pointed out that if once you tap into the irrational aspects of human nature, that is the group psychology, it overruns the reason or the ability of the individual to exercise reason. So one of the key aspects is in human nature, we tend to divide always into groups. We're a group animal. We divide in group for security, meaning, and we usually think of us versus them, who is the in-group and out-group. And this is this is where the propaganda is usually built up around, because if you can assign good values or good identity to the in-group or versus the out-group, then reality no longer really matters anymore. And you kind of see this, you know, if we invade Afghanistan, we do it because we just want freedom, democracy, and for little girls to go to school. When the Soviets did the exact same thing, it is for empire. So it doesn't matter. You can do exactly the same thing. One will always be good. The other one will always be evil. At worst, we might do the wrong thing, but we do it for the right reasons. At best, our adversaries might do the right thing, but they do it for the wrong reasons. So this is kind of the logic. And I guess Russia's always been the ideal out-group for us because, as you said, this has been going on for centuries. And traditionally, you know, who is us versus them? Russia can always play them. I mean, we were the West, Russia's the East. We were the Europeans. The Russians were the Asiatics because that's how they were referred to for a long time, given their position in the East. We were civilization. They were the barbarians, and they always played this role of the other. And it's been a key focus and a key concern in Europe for a long time. I mean, in the early 19th century, you had a lot of British scholars as well who was writing on this, arguing that we should address our Russophobia. This is a big problem. I mean, we have reasons to fear Russia. And when we have competing interests, we can fight the Russians, if you will. But this blind hatred and fear of Russia, it doesn't make any sense. We end up pursuing policies which are not in our own interest. And it's kind of interesting because if you read these pamphlets on Russophobia from Britain in was like in 1828, 1830s, they might as well be written today. It's just this immensely irrational act. And then, of course, if you bring it further into the Crimean War of the mid-19th century, the literature is the same. They point to what how we kind of divide into groups. So, for example, during the Crimean War, you had the Russian Empire versus the Ottoman Empire, and then the British and French come in on the side of the Ottomans or the Turks, and they kind of show how all the roles are assigned. So the Russians suddenly are the bad guy, the aggressor. The Ottomans, who were previously demonized, suddenly became a victim overnight. This is the Ukraine of today. They're no longer corrupt. They're the beacon of democracy. And then, of course, the British and the French would then be the virtuous, selfless savior who would then help the victim and push back on the aggressor. And they always assign these different roles. It doesn't make any sense at all if you actually know the history behind this, who's been doing what, and also the objectives of the different countries. But it's very powerful because this shapes the world, taps into the basic understandings people have of how the world works. So you can make weird claims that, well, the reason why NATO would occupy Afghanistan for 20 years, again, we want girls to go to school. And, it doesn't really make sense. This is not how the US forms, has a security strategy based on hegemony. It has to dominate in order to have security. It is not based on girls going to school, but this is how you do propaganda. You dress up your interests in the clothing of good versus evil, or East versus West. Liberal democracies versus authoritarianism, and this is the key way we frame things now. Because whenever there's a conflict around the world, people, you just suggested, people can't find these countries on the map, but you don't know to need where these countries are on the map. You don't need to know their history. You don't need to know the background of the war. All you have to do is, all they have been told is this is a conflict between liberal democracy and authoritarianism. This is it. One side is good, one is bad. Who is the aggressor, the victim, and who is the savior? This is the same play every time. And Russia always has been assigned the role of the aggressor and the boogeyman. And it's also always been important for Europe as well to have internal cohesion or solidarity. You can go back to the 1700s, or when the Poles were confronting Russia, and they were pointing out, once they take Poland, they will go for France. This is essentially putting all our security into one package. So we all have to stand against the Russians, otherwise we will fall together. And this has kind of been used over and over again, consistently. And it's been centuries now, and they're still doing the exact same playbook. So this was kind of my motivation for writing that book, because there's a very thick literature on what propaganda actually is. It's not meant to only be a slur to censor and cancel people. There's actually a literature behind it. There's a science, taps into the irrational aspect of human being. And anyways, I do go on, but thank you.
No. So I have a question for both you and Kit following up on that. And I know this is sort of impossible to answer, but just do your best. What percentage, roughly, do you think of Norwegian citizens and British citizens support the idea broadly of the Western Empire? And the Western Empire, hear this is where we're going with it, extending into Eastern Europe and Russia. Like, what do you think? How many Brits and Norwegians actually care about that? Or is it just the elites? Either one of you can address that.
I personally question the extent to which people in Britain know the geography of Europe to any extent beyond where France is.
Right.
And it's a point that I've made like many times, and I think that when you and I, Thaddeus, we spoke recently about the importance of prefixing American Empire with Anglo. The notion of like kind of global dominance is like a almost uniquely British one, right? And it's something that the British have attempted to impose upon the Americans. It is largely forgotten that at the time of the Spanish Civil War, there were many, the Spanish Civil War, the American-Spanish War, which was the kind of birth of American empire. There are a great many prominent American writers, including Henry James, who argued very strongly against this on the basis of like, well, we can barely govern ourselves. Why are we trying to govern other countries? And he also said, and it's a quote that stays with me, while empire might have civilized the British, it might turn us into demons. So much of US policy is informed by this completely insane and, yes, uniquely British idea of total world dominance, right? So, in my neck of the woods in kind of southeastern Europe, which is adjacent to Central and Eastern Europe, there are many countries that the populations either have positive views of Russia, or at the least, very skeptical views of the EU and NATO. And this is completely prescribed from public debate. We saw in Romania recently, there was a anti-NATO, anti-war candidate, Georgescu, who stood in Romania. Romania's Supreme Court overturned the results of the election because it looked like he might win. They also set the legal precedent that you can't run for political office in Romania if you're anti-NATO. what proportion of the US population A knows where Romania is, and B gives a damn about whether it's part of NATO? I would imagine it's like within the margin of error.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like this is something that we've tried to like really nail down at the Grayzone, and if I do say so myself, I think that we've done a pretty good job of it. Is the fact that that like in the Ukraine proxy war, this is something that the US could step away from very easily if it wished, and if it wasn't hindered by different layers of interests, by yapping European leaders, etc. From the British perspective, the Anglo-American Empire is on the line in Donbass because they have been pushing for this since 2014. And it's something I've open records, no need for leaks here. Like there is an individual called Chris Donnelly, who is a longtime British Ministry of Defence advisor, a longtime NATO advisor. In early 2014, following the Maidan coup, he told a British parliamentary committee, well, if Britain takes the lead in arming, say, like Azov Battalion, the openly neo-Nazi Ukrainian military regiment or right sector, this will disrupt the Obama administration's Asia pivot and refocus US attention on Europe and the Middle East, which is the traditional stomping grounds of the British. This explicitly serves British interests. The average American doesn't care about this, doesn't want it. In my opinion and experience, the idea of like global domination by the Americans is a very new one, and it's not something which Americans have taken to very naturally. And I'll pass the floor to Glenn. But I think it's a forgotten aspect of history is the British started the Cold War at a time that the US and the Soviet Union were allies, where in 1946, Churchill gives this speech in Fulton, Missouri, known as the Iron Curtain speech. And he effectively called for US and Britain to form a quote unquote special relationship to counter Soviet influence. The response of the US media and the US public was one of disgust and anger. Like, how dare this Brit come over here and tell us that we should be at odds with our closest ally? There were protests against quote unquote imperialist Winnie. At the time. That was the American perspective then. It's not long ago that was the perspective. And I think that actually, to an extent, with the rise of America First, as a populist idea, we kind of come full circle on that.
Great. So Glenn, do young Norwegian boys dream of growing up to fight for NATO?
Well, probably not, but it's hard to say because we have 169 representatives in parliament. All 169 are for sending weapons. None of them thinks we should sit down and talk to the Russians. We have a lot of newspapers, a lot of TV channels, and they're all saying exactly the same thing. And I also make the point, this is a remarkable consensus, but one has to ask how this consensus was achieved. Was it achieved by having an open discussion about the background of the conflict, the facts, and then we all suddenly agreed, yes, we have to fight this to the very end, no matter what happens. But no, we don't see this as the case. We see that any dissent is treated as treason and is purged. And you have to pay a very high social cost for even arguing that, well, perhaps NATO could have provoked this. I mean, it is so it's very hard to know what people actually are thinking. Indeed, I sometimes speak to retired diplomats, and they And when they call me, they say, yeah, this is, we shouldn't be doing this. Obviously, we can't speak about Ukraine without talking about NATO expansion. But they can't say this out in public because they know what's going to happen. They will be crucified. So it's hard to say what people know and what they're willing to say. And this is part of again, how you manage a crowd. This is people adjust to the crowd around them. If everyone is saying one thing, you will say the same thing. People usually adjust to the group. And there's also no if people want to ask, what do you want to fight for NATO, or we have to keep liberal hegemony or dominance, the general idea is that, well, what is the alternative? Because the alternative is believed to be chaos. So this has kind of been the underlying assumption which have been sold for so long. So if you say, well, some of these things weren't really democratic. So, for example, if you look at the toppling of Yanukovych back in 2014, which started this war, you can point out, well, it wasn't actually supported by Ukrainians. They didn't have majority support for this. We removed a democratically elected president against the constitution and the will of the Ukrainians as well. Why was this a good thing? Why is it good for democracy? But, we're told we are democracy. And this is kind of how you split the world, because we are liberal democracies, Russia's authoritarian. If you accept this premise, you can topple a government against the will of its people, and then you can call it democracy because you're integrating them or putting them into the orbit of NATO. So you're making the world more democratic, you're making the world more peaceful. And this is kind of the logic. If you buy into the premise of these competing stereotypes of good versus evil, I mean, you saw the same now with the US asserting itself in Armenia. If you look at this, you can see the disaster down the road. But the main thing that journalists will write is, well, more influence for America, less for Russia. That's peace. So this is kind of the intellectual level they're at the moment. And we say liberal democracy is good. What is democracy? That's us. So you link these values to an entity of power. So essentially, liberal democracy has become a hegemonic norm. If you like democracy, you like liberalism, then the West has to rule, and there's no real alternative. And this is the amazing thing they pulled off, because if there's some contradictions, we topple a democracy, install a dictatorship, well, at least they will be serving the interest of the democracy. So you can't do any wrong as long as this is sold. If I can just say one little thing, not a correction, that's a bit cocky, but extension on what Kit said about this starting in 2014. You can pull it for 10 years further back to 2004. This is when we supported or backed the Rose Revolution in Ukraine. But as we learned, a lesson from this was installing Yushchenko to serve NATO interests. It wasn't really great for Ukraine. And he ended up being described by Newsweek as the most unpopular leader in the world, which is a horrible title to have. So the lesson 10 years later, when we did another coup in Ukraine, was they don't let the Ukrainians vote their way back to a neutral position and Russia-friendly ties. So in 2014, what to do? We reorient the economy quickly away from the Russians towards the West, so they don't have the economic ties anymore. Purge the political opposition parties, which were friendly to Russia, also with the economic interest, make sure that we pick whoever should be in the new Ukrainian government. The finance minister was actually American, who was installed in 2014. She just got a Ukrainian passport on the day she took the position. You have the general prosecutor of Ukraine complaining that every new appointment to government had to be approved by Washington. We learned from New York Times on the first day after the coup, the United States began to rebuild Ukraine's intelligence agencies from scratch because they used to work the closest with Russia, and we can't have any of that. And purging the church, their language, and finally, when the Ukrainians have a chance to vote for peace again, they vote for the peace platform that Zelensky put forth in 2019, where he says, we should be allowed to speak Russian, we should be friends with Russia, let's install the Minsk peace agreement. Well, then we had this NATO militia trained by the US and NGOs, which essentially put red lines for Zelensky not to implement any of the campaign promises that 73% of Ukrainians had voted for. So we learned from the mistakes in 2004 and made this coup permanent in 2014. And this is why, yeah, the country is now being burnt to the ground. But when people are sold this story in the West, it's about democracy. This is it.
Right. But that's a story that is told and believed in, apparently, from what you've been saying, by the elites exclusively. So I want to, and the Norwegian people generally and the British people generally don't even have ideas about these things, right? And I think that's true for Americans. I mean, we can speak about American young men too, and Wyatt is from military land. I mean, I've known a lot of people, men, young men and women, who have served in the military and been gung-ho about killing people and sometimes killing Arabs and sometimes killing Muslims and sometimes killing Osama bin Laden. But I've never heard one member of the US military say, we need a global empire. I'm committed to having military bases in every country. I've never heard them say any of that. Liberal hegemony for everyone. We need democracy spread. Never. Has anyone heard a man in uniform say that? So I want to present a thesis I just came up with as you were talking, and I want the three of you to respond to it. So now we know that imperialism is an elite project, and the vast majority of ordinary people don't even know about this stuff. I am thinking about the Mackinder thesis and the Brzezinski thesis that Eurasia, the control of Eurasia, is crucial for any global empire. If you want your empire to be global, you must control the Eurasian landmass, was the thesis put forward by Mackinder and then by Brzezinski more recently. So that tells me altogether that Russophobia, and here's my thesis I want you to respond to, all three of you. Russophobia, the hatred of Russia, is actually highly rational for certain people, for imperialists, because Russia stands in the way of conquering Eurasia by the Western Empire. So doesn't it make sense for imperialists to hate Russia? Now, ordinary people, it is ridiculous for them to, because they don't care about conquering Eurasia, and they haven't read the Mackinder thesis. But does this make sense that it is on some fundamental level, maybe not every single aspect of it, you know, like the Skripals or things that are made up, but you know, the basic fundamental fear and hatred of Russia, I think, is highly rational if you're a global imperialist. Does that make sense, Glenn?
Well, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because, well, the Mackinder theory was that maritime powers has the ability to dominate the world. They're the natural empires because it's very difficult to diversify away from their dependence, given that the connectivity is by sea and it's easy to put up choke points. So this gives advantage in movement of troops and also commercial power. Now the problem here is you do have to run it as an empire because as Mackinder recognized at that time when Russia began to connect the Eurasian landmass by rail was if Eurasia is connected by land, then they would essentially make the dominance of the sea as a source of world dominance. It would make it, well, it would undermine it. So this was a threat to Britain, and it was then considered a threat to the United States. Again, this is not just a thesis from a British scholar in 1904. This was something that the Americans incorporated into their U.S. security strategies, throughout the Cold War. You can see it pop up the U.S. security strategy, for example, in 1988, where they recognized this is, why we fought in the world wars. This is what directed our Cold War policies. You have to make sure that one state or a group of states don't emerge in Eurasia coming together and then essentially put a check on the maritime hegemon. And if you are ruling Eurasia from the center, you do have to pursue an imperial policy. That is to divide and rule, to prevent the Eurasian powers from coming together. So make sure that the Russians are split from the Germans, the Chinese are split from the Russians, the Turks are split from Russia, India and China are at each other. Because if you divide the world, then you have one side which are obedient allies or vassals, and the other is a contained adversary. And the counter to this, of course, is to a large extent what the Chinese are pushing now. That is, if you can make all the countries work better together, then you can connect Eurasia by land as well. But no, I think given that Russia is the main largest territorial power in Eurasia, I think, yes, it makes a lot of sense.
The largest obstacle, right, to the extension of the Western Empire, right? Wyatt, what do you think? Is Russophobia rational on that level?
Yeah, it's a spigot that can be turned on and off whenever necessary. at the end of the Cold War, it was politically advantageous to turn off the Russia hatred for a little while. As recently as, you know, Obama debating with Mitt Romney and mocking him for his bellicose attitudes towards Russia and saying, you know, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. This, you know, this was just a handful of years ago that the Democrats were mocking the Republicans for being overly aggressive towards Russia. And now, yes, as part of, I think it's kind of a broader phenomenon, but the liberals have kind of become the embodiment of this, you know, it ties into Samantha Power and this whole responsibility to protect doctrine, but yeah, the idea that we're going to go out and make the world safe for democracy is almost like a liberal preoccupation now.
They invented it.
Right.
It's their idea. Yeah.
And yeah, so the traditional kind of, and this is why, for example, you know, I mean, a lot of it boils down to Hillary Clinton, but it's convenient to have things like, you know, the culture war issues. You can look at Russia and say, oh, look, you know, look what they do to gay people over there. They don't let them have pride parades, and you know, which probably true. I bet if I was gay, I would probably prefer not to live in, you know, rural Russia. But you know, that's not really for us to decide how they handle that.
So, Kit, hatred of Russia, rational for imperialists?
I mean, well, I mean, again, yeah, from the Anglo-American perspective, I think it is rational because Russia has historically been a wrecker from Britain's perspective. Now, you got to bear in mind that if you go back to the 1800s, Queen Victoria was called the grandmother of Europe because relatives of hers were sat on the thrones of every European monarchy. And you have completely crazy situations where King Leopold of Belgium and Kaiser Wilhelm in Germany, the reason they wanted empires was because their relatives all had empires and they thought it was unfair. Which is like quite an extraordinary like facet of history, which has kind of been forgotten. But Russia was always a wrecker from Britain's perspective. It supported the American War of Independence. It supported the North in the US Civil War. The US was on Russia's side during the Crimean War. And so even when Russia was ruled by the progeny of the British royal family, you look at photos of Tsar Nicholas and King George from the early 1900s, they are identical, like they're doppelgangers, right? So even when Russia was to an extent under the heel of the British, they were still seen as very problematic. And you have like the Great Game in the 1800s where Russian influence in Central Asia was viewed as a threat to British domination of India. When the Russian Revolution happens and the Romanovs are the British royal family is killed by the Russians, that's never forgive action. And I don't think that Britain's ruling elite have ever gotten over that. And I don't think they ever will. And as we have reported at the Grayzone, with some pride on the activities of Project Alchemy, a secret British Ministry of Defence created intelligence and military cell. Wyatt and I have done some crusading work on this, if I do say so myself. Like at the core of it is this notion of breaking up Russia into like easily exploitable chunks. This lay at the heart of the British-led invasion of revolutionary Russia in 1918. It was like in Godfather 2, where they carve up the cake of Cuba. That was the ethos. It was like, right, so the French will get the coal here, the British will get the timber in this region. It was divided amongst all of the powers, and it was expected that the great Russia, this grand landmass spanning many time zones, would never reemerge as a global power, and then it did. And in the process, it demonstrated that peasants revolting could result in revolutionary change. So, I mean, from the perspective of Anglo-American, particularly Anglo-imperialists, it is, of course, very natural and reflexive to hate Russia. And I think there was a very prescient book written by Mark McKinnon in the late 2000s. It's called The New Cold War. And it makes the point over and over again that America, often with British assistance, has expanded its influence into lands which are almost exclusively associated with Russian influence, like Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, parts of Central and Eastern Europe. And the obvious response to this is the Russians were going to get unhappy about it. We have all of these Branko Marcetic, a writer for the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and a regular Jacobin contributor, he put together all of the references in the WikiLeaks leaked cables of US diplomats, including Bill Burns, who served as the head of the CIA under Biden, when Ukraine in 2008 was named as a future NATO member. The huge backlash across Russian society, and Bill Burns in a memo to Condi stated there is no issue that unites Russians politically, ranging from hardcore pro-Kremlin activists to Putin's harshest critics, than Ukraine being part of NATO. But from the perspective of the British, it was absolutely fundamental to ensure that Ukraine was entombed in NATO, whether its public wanted it or not.
Wow. This has been brilliant and awesome, and I have learned a lot. I mean, really, the three of you have blown me up here. This has been fantastic. However, your fans are sitting in front of you, and I'm sure, because they're Grayzone fans, have a lot to say, and unlike most Americans and British, actually know a fuck ton. So can we bring the mic out here, and I will do my best to extend it. I think I can get it to the...
We actually have the
And, oh, awesome, even better. Cool. So yeah, you can just, can you just, I guess, raise your hand and he'll bring, is that okay? Yeah. Cool, and he'll bring the mic to you, so go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. You are all great. They just arrested someone in Italy, a Ukrainian,
Just now?
like 2 days ago,
Oh, I didn't know that.
supposedly who almost single-handedly on a yacht blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. So Seymour Hersh says the US and I think Norway and maybe the UK or Denmark or a third country actually did it. So why are they arresting some Ukrainian guy in Italy now? And
I just want to make sure, can
furthering-
Kid and Glenn hear this? I don't know if this mic is going in. You can hear her?
Yes, yes.
Awesome, continue,
Yes.
sorry, great.
why are they arresting someone now? Like, what's the media doing with that? I mean, it's on CNN and BBC, so
Great
you
question.
know it's definitely not true. So, what? Yeah. So why are they saying it now? And why are they doing this now? And what do you think, especially Glenn, about the Norwegian? Suppose what Seymour Hersh said, the Norwegian involvement with the U.S.
Well, I don't know much more than what Seymour Hersh has written. I know there's some scholars who have also tracked the movement of the American ships at the time. There's been some reports from Denmark that which kind of confirms to a large extent what some of the things which Seymour Hersh has argued. So his story seems credible, let's say that. But what I find fascinating with Nord Stream is if you just want to look at things you can prove 100%. What is interesting is that once, not only that the United States threatened to destroy Nord Stream. They've sanctioned it. Again, Biden standing right next to the German chancellor, promising that it wouldn't that it would no longer I forgot his words. Well, it would no longer be there if there would be a war. Now, but what is interesting, once the Nord Stream was blown up, we saw all the NATO countries, even the NATO Secretary General, everyone saying that all traces were leading to Russia. This was a Russian attack following the Russian playbook. I think the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg argued that this could be in Article 5, so it's an attack on NATO. And this whole thing was used to then, for the NATO to further assert more control and militarize the Baltic Sea, but also escalate the war in Ukraine. Now, after all of these efforts to point the fingers at Russia, they began with these new stories, the Ukrainians on a sailboat, all these things which kind of contradict a lot of the initial ideas. But then we have these stories that, well, yes, the CIA knew about this, and we tried to stop it. Zelensky tried to stop it, but it was too late. But now it's admitted that at least they knew in advance that it was not the Russians. So one has to ask then, why, if we knew that it wasn't the Russians, why did we use this the attacks on Nord Stream to escalate or militarize the Baltic Sea? Why did we use it to escalate the Ukraine war? Why we're threatening something like Article 5, which would mean nuclear war with the Russians, when we know that this was fake? And so it's quite concerning the way, what this the Nord Stream destruction actually represents. And what's made it even worse is this was top news as long as all the officials and journalists were saying, well, it's Russia. But now the main issue is we know it's not Russia. So now the main discussion is, well, is it then the Ukrainians or was it the Americans? And this is not a good narrative, and no matter what. And the journalists are only interested in good narratives. And if it's not the Russians, there's no good narrative. So for this reason, no one talks about Nord Stream anymore. It's really, really strange, especially for the Germans who are now deindustrializing and seeing their economic future destroyed. And still, nobody really wants to talk about Nord Stream because, again, facts should not get in the way of the narrative. So, yeah.
So, I mean, this is obviously a little bit speculative, but I think the timing may be notable in that we are, more broadly speaking, seeing kind of, it seems like a handover of the Ukraine proxy war from American hands over to the Europeans. Trump keeps complaining about it. Obviously, we know the last time he chewed out Zelensky and in the White House, was threatening to take away military aid and intelligence cooperation, and then a week later he completely changes his tune. So who knows for sure that Trump is actually trying to take the off-ramp. But if that is the case, and they ultimately do want to hand over this proxy war to the Europeans, something like this, having a Ukrainian in custody to blame, wrap a nice little bow on this story, sell it to the public, now, Europe can continue fighting this war. We found the evildoer, the one single Ukrainian who was responsible for destroying the German economy.
That's fascinating. There's a few back there actually, and there's all over the place. But he had the guy in the middle in the back there. He was first, yeah.
I want to thank all the speakers for your presentations, and I specifically want to thank Kit Klarenberg for being the most pro-American and optimistic on the panel, which is kind of funny given that he's not from here. But I just kind of wanted to respond a little bit to the pessimism that, it seems to be apparent in the people here who are on stage, because what Kit Klarenberg was going through about, American history, and specifically our anti-British sentiments that wasn't so long ago, I think is what makes us powerful as Americans. I think back to people like President Kennedy when he made a declaration at the United Nations in 1963, 2 months before he was assassinated, where he told the Soviets directly, I want to work with you on joint space exploration as a way to end the Cold War. And then he was assassinated 2 months later. Now, whether or not you think his intentions were pure and true, I think as Americans, we have something enshrined in us that when government becomes destructive of these ends, we are to alter or abolish it. And I think it's our role to educate our fellow Americans that we have that. It's why I'm running for Congress. You know, my mom isn't a movie director. She didn't make Mississippi Masala.
What's your name?
Jose Vega.
Oh, you're Jose. Hi, Jose.
Hi. And, you know, my dad's not a famous academician. You know, no hate on Zoran, really. I hope he does great, but, you know, I come from nothing. And so I would just encourage other Americans to not give in to the pessimism. And so to that end, I would just hope that Kit, well, I have two questions. One, Kit, if you could just expand a little bit more on the anti-British sentiments American citizens had in the 20th century. Like, for example, Henry Kissinger talked about how he kept his British intelligence friends more closely briefed than he did his Americans. And secondly, to Glenn Diesen, you, I think a month ago, were talking about Friedrich List, the economist, and you were talking about Henry Carey as solution concepts for what the real alternatives could be. And I thought that was great, you know, because as much as we talk about the doom and gloom, I think a real solution concept is what makes people optimistic, like what the world could be. So those are my two questions.
Thank you. Kit. Take it away.
Okay, sure. So, number one, Jose, I obviously can't vote for you, but I would.
All right.
If I was
I'm
in
gonna
any
clip that.
position to do so. Yeah, please do. Please do. You know, my rates are good, but like in all seriousness, like I think that I mean, look. It must never be forgotten, right, that like the most common national holiday in the world is Freedom from Britain Day. And it is celebrated on average every 6 days somewhere in the world, right? Okay, so like, and now if you go back to the early 1950s when the British was at war with Mossadegh, the elected leader of Iran, Mossadegh did a tour of the US in which he framed his battle against the British state and particularly BP, which was raping and pillaging Iran's vast oil reserves. He framed it as, in the same terms as America's struggle for independence against the British in 1776. His political, public, and media audiences were typically very receptive to this, okay? The coup that removed Mossadegh from power was a result of the MI6 manipulating the CIA and the State Department into backing it. Okay, this is not a natural strand of American thinking, as hard as that is to believe for some people. Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, when he rid his country both of the imperialist Japanese but also the Vichy French, he read out a Declaration of Independence for Vietnam, which was almost identical to the US Declaration of Independence. Like, America's struggle for independence from Britain was a inspiring rallying call for colonized, oppressed people the world over. Okay, it is a very recent thing in history that America has filled this imperial role. And so frequently it has been at the direct or indirect behest of the British. That's not to say that America is completely innocent in this. I don't take that view. But so when we look all over the world, particularly flashpoints now, Ukraine, as we've discussed, being led by the British, Syria, where HTS seized power with the assistance of an MI6 connected organization run by the foreign and defense advisor of the current British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, called Intermediate. They have an office in the Syrian presidential palace. Okay, so much of US policy is informed by the British going around the world, starting fires, hoping that the Americans will either extinguish the blaze on their behalf or pour more petrol on, depending on their interests and wishes at the time. okay, like neutralizing that British influence would go a significant way to, I think, a more sensible, less belligerent US foreign policy as a result.
So we need
Just
more.
my opinion.
Yes. So we need more Anglophobia.
Yes, absolutely.
We have the wrong phobia. We need Anglophobia. Where's the mic? Oh, I don't know who is next. I guess over here, in the side here.
Thank you, and thanks for being here. My question has to do with Columbia professor Jeffrey Sachs, who addressed the European Parliament earlier this year. And he dropped some very, very interesting and thoughtful truth bombs, in my opinion, basically pointing out the fact that the European Union has not had a coherent foreign policy. Russia being a natural trading partner, it was put into a position of an adversarial position basically because of NATO. And I'm wondering, in your reporting, what is the sentiment of the leaders in the EU after those comments, or in the sentiment of the people of the EU? Did that make any impact at all?
Maybe Glenn want to take this?
Was that for? Who was that for?
I mean, whoever wants
Anybody?
to address
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Not me. Glenn? That sounds like a Glenn question.
Well, it's hard to respond to. It didn't really make it had made a lot of big noise on the internet, as we don't have the same gatekeepers there, but it wasn't. I think it was more ignored by many European leaders. Because the criticism of the Ukraine war, for example, is not really approved of. But it must. I assume that at some level it must resonate with the European leaders. Keep in mind that for many years the European leaders kept talking about European sovereignty, strategic autonomy. All of these are, nice words for more independence for Europe from the United States. Indeed, part of the EU project was also intended for the EU to use their collective bargaining power to have more equality in relations with the United States. So I guess the main objective was to have a collective hegemony after the Cold War based on cooperation between the US and the EU. Now, obviously, this hasn't been achieved, and I think that's quite obvious if you look around the world. I mean, Europe is not just in all dire straits in terms of its security and economy, but also its relevance in the world and the way people look at Europe. It's becoming almost a bit of a joke when you get these pictures recently out of the White House with this, sitting there like school children. So one has to ask, how did this happen? And Macron a few years ago warned that we should not become vassals. We have to stand up. But what does this actually entail? How do you have 27, 28 countries who are supposed to stand together and speak with one voice? Either it becomes very authoritarian, that you outsource your decision making to some unelected bureaucrats, or you have to find a way of addressing dissent. So if you deal with, for example, policies towards Russia, how does it make sense that Latvia and Greece should have the same view towards Russia? It doesn't make any sense, and I think this is the problem in Europe. They just form these speech acts where they form everything as questions of morality. That is, you can't really take an opposing view if you're not supporting pushing weapons into Ukraine, or you think it's a good idea to sit down and talk to the Russians. This means that you're immoral. You don't care about Ukraine. If you cared about Ukraine, you would fight with the last Ukrainians. So this is kind of the only acceptable path. And I think this is what makes it very difficult for the EU to have a coherent and also rational policy, because no one is pursuing rational policies anymore. Look at the main leaders who are now representing Europe, besides the unelected ones. You have Merz, Starmer, Macron. I mean, they're some of the most unpopular leaders there are. The popular leaders, they are deemed to be illegitimate. So it's no, I think yes, Sachs was very much spot on. But the Europeans have to find a way of returning to rationality, but also stop subordinating themselves to the United States. And for me, that was the most important point he had. Why do you keep begging the Americans to have you represented? I mean, you have a larger population now. You should be able to pick up the phone and call the Russians. It's the Europeans who won't pick up the phone. And for 3.5 years, they're isolating themselves. They're subordinating themselves. And there's no good reason for this at all.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Let's go to the front here. Up here. She's had her hand up for a long time. On the side there. And then we'll go to lunch.
Thank you very much. I'm Diane Sayre. I'm president of the LaRouche organization. And your response indicates there is a precedent for witch hunts. My question has to do with the Alaska summit. I know President Trump probably would not admit that he learned anything there, but he did back down off of this ceasefire idea, which was very unworkable. And I know various people, including myself, really think that it might benefit the world if he would go to Beijing for the parade on September 3rd, the victory against fascism in Asia. Because unfortunately, while many people probably don't consciously think they want to fight for empire, I think it's very much in the axiomatic outlook of Americans that we are the global hegemon. And what you see when you travel is it's not true. It's not true anymore. So I want to know what you think. Is there any possibility that he would go over there, meet with Xi and Putin, and perhaps get another education?
Good question. Another question? Okay. You want to pick the person? Right in the front.
I just wanted to say, I live in France, I have UK citizenship, and I have some relations in Poland, and even though I agree with the distinction in terms of wanting to fight for NATO or wanting a global empire, or in terms of Americans wanting, depending on which credible authority you listen to, between 750 and 1,003 American bases abroad, that the general population don't adhere to. Now, I can't speak for the United States, I don't have enough knowledge, but in terms of Western Europe, and I mentioned 3 countries, but I'd also include Ireland, but I think we're deluding ourselves, or maybe, if I may be so bold, you're deluding yourselves if you think it's either only the elite or only the managerial class. I mean, if you want in Paris or anywhere in France, if you want to try and fly a Russian flag outside your window instead of a Ukrainian flag, you might as well fly an ISIS flag. That's the response. Given there's no rumble in France, we don't believe in freedom of speech. So in terms of, and I also should have mentioned the Baltic states, which again I have relations and knowledge of. So I think the extent to which this penetrates the general population in terms of the Ukraine war is very pronounced and very profound. And if you look at the amount of time it took for people to emancipate themselves from the narrative on Gaza, now obviously, you know, going from, you know, dockers refusing to load ships, or what happened, was it in Spain? I don't recall if it was in Spain or Italy that they stopped this Israeli weapons manufacturer. But the amount of time it took for people to unfurl flags at football fields and so on. So I would rather have incredibly rigorous backing from poll data to such things, because so Chomsky said the US was the most indoctrinated society in the world, but the degree of indoctrination and the degree of irrational pushback, if you say anything about Ukraine or Gaza or Israel, is just incredible. And there's all sorts of other issues where it was the same before, like Afghanistan. So first of all, yeah, I'd like to ask whichever one wants you to reply if you think there's any merit to what I'm putting forward. And the second thing to say is, if you look at the time it took to change for Gaza, I don't know how much time it will take to change for Ukraine. But if you talk about Ukraine or Putin or Lavrov or rationality, good luck. I've talked long enough.
So I think, did I hear the thesis is that the imperial consciousness is actually fairly widespread among the populations in Europe? Is that what you're positing there? That I was saying that it's an elite phenomenon, right?
More specific indoctrination regarding Russophobia.
Okay.
And supporting Israel. I should also mention that another country where people are absolutely fanatical is Germany.
Yes.
And I should also mention that Germany, when people are more emancipated, it's because the leader of that country is more emancipated.
Yes.
So you're not supposed to say this.
Okay.
Viktor Orban, but yeah.
Gotcha. I just wanted to get the thesis out there. So anyone want to respond to this quickly? We have a few minutes.
I mean, I would personally be happy to. I mean, number one, I'm sorry that you have UK citizenship. It's a blight upon us all. But in all seriousness, I mean, you talk about like a consciousness shift in respect of Gaza. I actually think that even though it's only taken the best part of 2 years for the mainstream media to catch up with the fact that Israel is committing a genocide on like a 21st century Holocaust, average people have caught up a lot quicker. And I think that we actually see, in respect of Ukraine, if you look at polls of Europeans, including in countries which are very, very, very pro Kiev in their dispute with Moscow, in terms of public backing for more defense spending, quote unquote, in terms of, say, conscription, which has been mooted in countries like Germany, there is zero support for this. Like actually, like average citizens are a lot more switched on, a lot smarter than you might give them credit for. They can see very clearly like what caused these conflicts, the actual drivers here. I mean, in respect of Ukraine, we had for the first pretty much 2 years of this, unrelenting mainstream propaganda about how this was this grand battle for European values between the free, plucky, underdog democracy of Ukraine versus its despotic, autocratic, evil, Hitlerite neighbor, Russia. That's collapsed like pretty spectacularly. So, I mean, I have, again, maybe it's just like, call it bloody-minded optimism, if you must. But I mean, I actually think that people are a lot more aware of what is happening and why than you might give them credit for. And as ingrained as pro-Ukrainian, pro-Israeli propaganda is like in the mainstream, it's unsustainable now. And we have reached a point where the overwhelming majority of mainstream outlets, at least in the English language world, are admitting that, oh, well, yes, like Israel is committing genocide, and B, Ukraine is losing this pretty terribly, and ooh, actually, they're a very corrupt country with a very serious problem with far right, if not outright fascist elements being in positions of influence and power. So, I mean, irrespective of what the mainstream media says, I think the feeling on the street is actually very different. And again, that I find that like encouraging. I might be completely delusional here, but I mean, if you look at polls, support for keeping this going in Europe is very low. That's without even factoring in the fact that like US polls show that something like 70% of Ukrainians want their government to end this as soon as possible. via negotiations. And this is while Zelensky maintains total control of the media in Ukraine, and the country remains under martial law, which has led to the jailing of opposition activists, the banning of opposition parties. So yeah, like I retain some degree of hope for the future, and it's all down to people power. It's all down to organizing and enough average citizens saying "not in my name," and we're seeing a lot of that.
Or it comes down to Russia winning.
Yes.
Right.
There is
one or the other, right?
Well.
One or the other.
Yeah, but I mean, when you see, for instance, like, you know, mass protests against mobilization, or like babushkas in Ukraine, like risking their lives to prevent people getting hoovered up by the conscription gangs.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's important, and we should never forget
that is people power, and it's incredibly inspiring. Yeah. And you're right. I think I'm going to say I prefer Kit's take, and I certainly hope he's right. I prefer optimism, but I do see the evidence. Even in Ukraine, you're saying, even in Ukraine, the mass resistance, right, to the military state there that's been going on is incredible and proof of a lot. So thank you, Kit, for zooming in.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Glenn, for gracing us with your presence. We learned a lot from you. Thank you, WYATT, for being with us.
Thanks.
And thank all of you for the great questions. So we're gonna have a lunch break now, and then we're gonna reconvene right here at 1 o'clock for Palestine. And Max would like to say something.
Yeah, just an announcement for everyone who's watching at home. We will end this stream, and then there's another stream coming online at 1, and I don't know if they're Peter Thiel associates, but Rumble will not allow us to run 2 streams in one day for some reason. So you're only going to be able to access that on YouTube and Twitter X. So meet us back here at 1. And thanks to Eric and Corey, who are streaming this for us, volunteering, really doing heroic work. Please give a hand to Eric and Corey for making this possible, for making this an international event. And thank you all for being here once again.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Did you have? I'm trying to remember. Did you have?
Yeah.
That's right. I heard I live in England. It's controlled. So I think this is like very small term. The mayor is. I'm in England. The mayor. Is mayor. They're rid of the person. Yeah.
It feels weird to me. I'm like, oh,
She has to no, it's fully. I guess like here in the breeze. I guess like plugging in everything. I need to find a restroom. I'm gonna do that real quick. Say goodbye to the live stream. Alright, goodbye, Grayzone live streamers. Check the Grayzone page. It's gonna be stream session 2, and we'll see you there. Peace. So I mean, it's right. Yeah, same.